my job today is to talk a little bit about Green River. And then I hope by the end of my brief description of a 20-year investigation in about 30 minutes is somewhat inspiring to you. But you're already inspired because you're here, right? You're already looking for a way to help. Here's kind of what I jotted down, only 4 things that I could have a long list, but these I think are the most important, and then I'm going to tell this story, and then I'm going to wrap it up at the end with hopefully some ways that we can help. 4 things that I learned during Green River. One of the things that when we started in 1982, police departments weren't very good at taking missing persons reports. In fact, they told people to call back in 24 hours or 48 hours, and then we'll investigate. Probably just, is upset teenager and went to stay with a friend. Should be back in the morning, So, it sadly delayed the investigation of a lot of cases. So I think one of the things that we can do is find out if local police departments, because every agency has different policies, make sure that your police department, your sheriff's office is taking that missing persons report when the person calls in to say, the mom, the dad, the aunt, the uncle, the caregiver calls to say, so-and-so is missing and I'm worried about her. Make sure that policy for those law enforcement agencies are taking those reports right away. Secondly, we did public service announcements, and I was a part of that. I would get on TV, give a someone knows something, and they do. You just got to connect with the right people, as Andrew pointed out. But that was the message of our PSAs. The captain of the task force was one of the persons on. The media person, Faye Brooks, some of you may remember her. And then I was on doing the same thing, and that is someone knows something. Get the word out there, make sure that people know. And I know that Christine with Compassion Washington is and has a plan for educating the public. That's a part of her STEP program. Part of the process will be being at the venue and handing out information about human trafficking and how you can recognize people in distress, where if you see something that looks a little suspicious, don't hesitate to call. It's to see something, say something phrase. Number 3, one of the things that we quickly learned is trying to interview people on the street is really tough, because they don't want to talk to the cops, first of all, and they don't want to talk to the cops in front of people. And so what we did is we went to the jails and we started interviewing people who were arrested connected to human trafficking in the jails. And we gained a lot of information that way. Who else was involved, what other pimps were involved, and where they were taken, how they got here, all of those things, and all that information was, who else were they working with, what were their names. So the other reason for going and interviewing people who have been arrested in the traffic industry in jail is to witness to them, right? And I know that there's some effort here too, where people are actually going in and talking to people who are incarcerated in our jails and our prisons. So when you witness to people in prison, in jail, it's powerful, believe me, it's very powerful. And trying to get people out of the human trafficking trade is very, very difficult. We tried that for years, decades, 2 decades, in convincing people that the lifestyle that they were in was unsafe, harmful, and could be deadly. And the last thing I want to mention is the focus on arresting the Johns and the pimps and the gangs that are trafficking. In the 80s, we were more focused on arresting the young girls for prostitution. In my experience, one of the things that we discovered was that And I'm going to talk about my experience. So these were young girls. These were teenagers and young women. And a lot of these young women and teenagers ended up on the street because they were abused at home. So they were victimized at home, whether it's sexually, emotionally. They were abused at home and they left and ran away. Now I can identify that with that. I left my home when I was in high school and lived in a 1956 Mercury. I ran away from domestic violence. I was in physical fights, have the scars on my body to prove it from my father. Saw my mother knocked to the ground many, many times. And I'm the oldest of 7 kids. So I left home. These girls left home because of those reasons. And then when they got on the street, they were victimized again. They were victimized by the pimps, victimized by the Johns, victimized third time by the system. Because they were not treated as victims. They were not treated as young girls, young women who needed our help. They were treated as criminals. So I think we progressed to a point in time where we recognize that these young girls need help, but the focus really needs to be on arresting those people that are taking advantage of our young girls and our young women. And those are the Johns and the pimps, okay? When I started this case, I was 32 years old in 1982. I'd been in the homicide unit for 4 years with the King County Sheriff's Office before. My first prostitution case was January of 1982. She was found in South King County near the Pierce County line. In July of 1982, Wendy Caulfield was found in the river in Kent. We found out they were cousins, so we immediately thought they might be related because they were related. August 12th of 1982, Debbie Bonner was found in the river in King County jurisdiction. So that was my first official case that I was assigned. In August of 1982, on August 15th, 3 days later on a Sunday, I remember that day because it was supposed to be my daughter's birthday celebration. It was reported that one body was found. Gary Ridgway put 3 bodies there. When we arrived, we knew there were 2 bodies there. A rafter had come down the river. He'd seen what he thought were mannequins alongside the riverbank with rocks piled on them. When he got closer, discovered they were 2 deceased young girls, called the sheriff's office. And as I was processing that scene, on my way down the riverbank, I found a 3rd body, and that was Opal Mills. We knew right then that we had a serial murder case. Obviously, on Monday, we gathered together 25 detectives in the King County Sheriff's Office, and we had an internal investigation going. In October of '82, the task force was reduced in size, and I was left alone with these cases. I had six cases that I was investigating. They put me in what they call the old Ted Bundy room, and that's where Bob Keppel investigated the Ted Bundy murders. So I was up there by myself with 6 murder cases, 6 young girls who were found dead in King County. I worked by myself all of those months now up until the end of 1983, where they said we're going to have an enhanced task force. January 16th of 1984, we had a new sheriff. He came in and said, okay, we're going to enhance this task force. So then we asked police departments and sheriff's offices from across the state to be a part of this task force. There were at times up to almost 75 to 80. The FBI joined the task force in 1986. Put yourself in this situation. You're a detective on the task force, and the tips are coming in. By the end of 1983, we had 13 victims. We discovered this much later, that the killing still happened, but he was hiding the bodies, putting the bodies in different places around the county, all the way down into Oregon. So talk about the transportation of our victims. They were operating in Seattle. They'd go to Vancouver. We had connections in Vancouver, BC. They'd go right back down again. Some of them actually went to Tijuana, San Diego area, then up to Vegas, then over to LA, up to Portland, up to Seattle. So the same sort of route that Andrew described today was actually happening back. That's not changed. But you're on the task force, and you have tips coming in like crazy. In fact, what we ended up with 40,000 tips. 40,000 tips. We had 10,000 items of evidence by the time the case was brought to trial. Try to keep track of 1982 through the 80s and the 90s before there was a computer. Sometimes people forget that. We were actually using a Rolodex. Does anyone in here not know what a Rolodex is? I'm looking at the younger faces. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? 40,000 tip sheets, 10,000 items of evidence, no computers. We finally got a computer in 1986, and the computer was a VAX, what they called a VAX computer. It would take up the size of this room. And it could not correlate information. All it could do is hold information. You could ask it questions about, give me the list, give me the names, give me the addresses, but it couldn't collate. So what we had to do is we had to put these printouts that came in these large sheets with the perforations down the side. Some people are nodding their heads. Yeah, well, if you ask for people who were registered to a pickup truck, because that was one of our suspect, in fact, Ridgway drove a couple of different pickup trucks. We'd have a stack like this. We'd unfold it in the schoolhouse that we were in Burien, down the hallway, and then we put it next to a list of people arrested for assaulting or patronizing, assaulting women, patronizing prostitutes. We also had a list of people who had fishing licenses because the Green River was a steelhead spot for people. We take those three lists and we put them side by side down the hallway, and then we'd assign 2 to 4 detectives on each. We'd be on our hands and knees, and we'd be yelling out addresses, phone numbers, names, birth dates, and we'd highlight those. If they appeared on all 3 lists, they were an A suspect. If 2, they were B, so on. Well, that's one thing that you would have to deal with as a detective on the Green River Task Force. But the thing that it is really tough to even talk about is that you, day after day, are collecting the bodies of little girls and young women. And some weeks, 8 bodies a week. And I remember coming home having to undress in the garage because the smell was so bad from sifting and collecting remains in almost any state of decomposition that you could imagine. And we found those bodies in Washington State, pretty much scattered. So when I drive around Washington State, it's sad that I could drive over the Cascades or over Highway 410, or even up into Snoqualmie and Snohomish. I can say I recovered a body here, I recovered a body here, I recovered the body here. I can close my eyes and I can remember each site. I may not remember all the names, but I can remember each site. And this site up off of I-90, off a logging road, hike about half a mile into the woods because the bones were carried by an animal. I found a skull. And we identified her from her dental work. So it was hard to investigate because you have to identify each one of these victims first, so that then you can go back and talk to the family, talk to the friends. I was standing on a street corner. We find that we can find out she was standing on a street corner at this date and time, but who was with her? It's hard to determine that because most of those people on the street are transient. Most of them don't want to talk to the police. So we ended up with, sometimes 6 years later, identifying somebody or finding the body, then identifying them, so going back 6 years trying to investigate a case as to where that person was is almost impossible to do. So fast forward up to, about, let's say, 1990. The powers that be, the political powers that be, decided that we weren't going to solve this case So they ended the investigation. How did they end it? They took the money away. It was costing about $2 plus $2.5 million a year. And because it was costing $2.5 million a year, they ended the investigation on a case where at least 70 people were killed. How much is a person's life worth? So they closed the investigation down. I was fortunate. I was promoted to sergeant. I was assigned to the Southwest Precinct where Ridgway was doing most of his work. So what did I spend my graveyard shift doing? I supervised my guys and gals out there on the street, but I went to the dump sites, the sites where the bodies were found, and I was hoping to catch him because part of what we knew is he'd come back to the scene. We learned later that he actually did that. So in 1990, I went to patrol, and a couple of other detectives went to the Major Crimes Unit, and they monitored the case. By this time we had a computer. They monitored all the tips coming in. I was still getting calls because people just put my face with the case, and I'd be calling in those tips to the detectives who are now managing the information. It was still an ongoing investigation, but there were only 2 detectives. In 1990, I was involved in a head-on car crash. A young man driving 60 miles an hour decided to pass on a hill, double yellow line, hit me head-on at 60. I was doing 40, so it's a 100-mile crash. That night, I went to work, continued to the precinct, but in the middle of that shift, I ended up with severe back pain, went to the hospital. They found I had 2 ruptured discs. I had surgery, and I was off for 6 months, went back to work. In 1996, my foot wasn't working anymore. It just hung there, my right foot. So I went into the doctor. He says, you know, you've got nerve damage. We've got to do surgery tomorrow. So I went in the next morning. They did another surgery in 1996. And he said, I don't know if you're going to get the use of your foot back. And you should start looking in the want ads for a job. So my career was on the line here for me. And so I do a lot of praying. So I went home, I did a lot of praying, and I did a lot of wiggling, trying to wiggle my toes and get my ankle moving and praying. And I was looking in the want ads, and a miracle, 2 weeks later, I got a call that Ron Sims wanted to interview me to be the sheriff. So I learned that on a Friday in March. I went into the interview on Monday. On Tuesday, I got a phone call from the sheriff's secretary, executive assistant, that Ron Sims wanted to have dinner with me on Tuesday night in Kenmore. I had dinner with Ron on Tuesday. He walked in, sat down at the table, says, I want to offer you the job of sheriff. On Wednesday morning, I was sworn in as the sheriff of King County. That's how that happened. I was looking for a job. And all of a sudden now, I'm the sheriff of King County. What did I do as the sheriff? I reopened the Green River case. Now, that's not something I did, right? I had a lot of help in my career and my family. My wife and I have been married, be 56 years in June, so she's put up with a lot. But I had a team. I had a team of detectives. That whole time I worked for the task force. I had a team in the King County Sheriff's Office who were supportive and helping. And that's what it takes, right? We can't do this alone. It takes all of us to do this. And we opened up that case and we ended up with new science coming along, DNA science. And it's so much progressed from the time that I first used it that we first used it in law enforcement in 1999. That's when we first submitted our evidence. And a lab back on the East Coast, a couple of labs said sample is too fragile, too old, too minute, and we don't have the technology now to look at it. So it was looked at again later. We finally got a call and from the lab, bring your evidence up, we think we can do it now. And in 2001, they identified 4 of the victims had Ridgway's DNA. And then we looked even further into the evidence after we reopened the case, and we discovered that there were 3 cases where we actually found some microscopic paint evidence. So the DNA helped us solve that case. We put him under surveillance, and we had decoys out there, because we now are arresting the Johns. And we followed him, and lo and behold, in 2001, he is still out there. He's still out there picking up young girls and young women. He stopped and talked to our decoy, a King County police officer. And that's when we said, okay, we're not going to watch him anymore. We don't want someone to get hurt. So we arrested him. He decided that so the first 4 victims, it was just, we charged him on were DNA evidence. And so he had an excuse for that. His attorney says, well, yeah, we admit that he was out there as a John. And that's what you do, you leave DNA behind. But that doesn't mean he killed him. Well, the paint evidence was it. We found paint on his coveralls that we had taken in 1986 in a search warrant, and we found paint on 3 of the victims. And so he was charged with 7 cases. That's when he said, okay, I don't want to die. I want to make a deal. And so we talked to the prosecutor's office and his attorneys, and Ridgway decided, I'm going to tell you about 65 women that I killed, and I will take you to the different sites. Well, although he took us to different sites, he's a pathological liar. He's been diagnosed that way, and he's a psychopath. So try to interview somebody who's a pathological liar and a psychopath. We did that for 6 months. We took him on outings. He did take us to new sites. We recovered bodies that we hadn't known about. We on the missing list, but we hadn't recovered the bodies at the sites that he had taken us to. So we charged him with 48. He pled guilty to 48. He's since now pled guilty to 49. We know that he's killed at least 65. But 49 young girls, 49 lives. And he is in Walla Walla, been there, he's been in jail now since 2001. You know what? All of us in this room, every human being goes through stuff. We all have stuff. We're all God's children. And he knows we're going to deal with stuff. I got stuff, we got trials and tribulations that we all go through. But what happens when we go through those trials? We learn. We have an experience and we learn. And we take those lessons that we learn from those trials and tribulations that we've been through, and we share them. I am fortunate and blessed. I get to share my story to a number of people like you and others quite frequently. Some people don't share their story. We all should be sharing our stories with people. The learning experience and the help that you can give to others. From your trials and tribulations, from the lessons that you learn, you now have the ability, all of us in this room and others that you know, have the ability to serve others with that knowledge and experience that you've gained. And that's why you're here today. Why are we doing this, and why are we helping people? Because we love them. Because we care. Because they're somebody's daughter. I have 2 daughters. They were 8 and 9 when I started the case. I just can't imagine if my daughters were one of the ones that I recovered. These are somebody's daughters. So what does that lead me to? The last point is, we don't give up. You all have the ability to help someone. We all have the ability to save a life. And even though you get discouraged some days, it's easy to come in and say, I'm going to work today. And you go about your business and you're on the computer and you're reading emails and you're texting people And then sometimes you really forget about, why am I even doing this, right? You get wrapped up in it, and so you might even go home and go, you know, I give up. I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm asking you today not to give up. Don't give up. These are somebody's daughters. I appreciate you guys having me today. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
This is his book, Chasing the Devil. You can find it on Amazon. And we are going to launch a book study through Compassion Washington. So
yeah, I don't make any money off of this book. I want you to know it all goes to the Pediatric Interim Care Center in Kent, who take in drug-addicted babies.
Hope, health, and healing. Compassion Washington.